All right. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Cash Clifton, and welcome to the April Student Engagement Webinar for New Mexico DELT, or Distance Education and Learning Technology. Today, we're talking about creating prompts for meaningful online discussions. This webinar series is all about how can you get students engaged, how can you get students involved in distance learning, and my hope is by getting students engaged and involved, you will see some nice retention rates in distance learning. It's going to be a little bit of a challenge as you introduce technology as a barrier compared to actually working with the students face-to-face. So the spirit of these webinars is what are some best practices, what are some great ideas for getting students engaged online. One key theme throughout this webinar series is that I want you to keep in mind good teaching is good teaching. I'm not necessarily telling you to throw out all of your teaching techniques and all of your skills and start over fresh. What I'm wanting you to consider is how can you adapt what already works, the good things you already know, to a new format, to an online format. And then what are some things you can come up with to be creative in the distance education realm? There are lots and lots of resources out there related to distance education, and our group is actually creating a clearinghouse of resources, a repository, if you will, that's available here at nmdelt.org. Be sure and check that out. If you want to stay up to date with what the NMDelt team is doing, you can follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/NMDelt and simply like us. If you have any questions or concerns, my email address is right there. Feel free to contact me. So the question I want you to ponder for today is, can you develop a meaningful relationship with a distance learning student? If no, why do you think you can't? If yes, what are some barriers to overcome? So I'm going to leave that for you to think about, and anyone who would like to share their thoughts about that, please use that through the chat box here in Hangouts, and we will share that information. So the goal for today's webinar, I want you to brainstorm about ways to engage distance learning students like you do in a traditional setting. So how can you get students involved in distance learning like you do in the traditional classroom? So when it comes to online student discussions, and really when it comes to distance learning in general, we do have a bit of a roadmap for what best practice is. And the best practice is considered the Quality Matters rubric. It's something that's been in development for years and years. It's actually a set of international standards. So the full rubric is available at www.qualitymatters.org. You can find lots of training materials at that website. You can also find Quality Matters training on YouTube. And some of that is available through us here at New Mexico DELT. So what does Quality Matters say is best practices for student discussion? One thing they say is the activity should promote achievement of the stated learning objectives. So whatever your objectives are, all of the activities for discussion should tie into that somehow. This shouldn't just be random conversations, as I would hope they're not in the regular classroom. Provide opportunities for interaction that supports active learning. I added the required part. It's been my experience that with ABE population, you can provide opportunities, but it's a little difficult to get people to first initiate conversation. If you require it, if you just don't give them the option, my experience has been that you get a little bit more buy-in. Students are uncomfortable at first, but a lot of times what I see is once they get used to the discussion formats, once they get used to interacting with some of their peers, once they get used to interacting with you, you'll see more and more engagement. The instructor's plan for response time and feedback should be clearly articulated by you. One thing to watch out for in distance learning, this has been my experience, I've also read about this a lot online, is students will have unrealistic expectations about response times. Think about the way technology works. You want to connect with someone on Facebook, see what they're thinking. You can get to what's going on in their life almost instantaneously by just clicking on their picture in Facebook. We live in a society that is increasingly technologically engaged. And because of that, people are used to instant responses, instant gratification, if you will. And so your students may expect that coming into distance learning. They're used to instant responses when engaging with a computer. And so you need to be clear with them that no, that's not going to be the case when it comes to interacting with you. My personal policy is that I will respond to students within 24 hours, Monday through Friday, and within 48 hours, Saturday and Sunday. Now, do I make students wait 48 hours for a response? Very, very rarely. That's only in cases where maybe I'm sick or maybe where I'm out of town. So do your best to respond sooner if possible. One other caution that I want to say here is if you do begin distance learning, make sure you're not constantly glued to your computer, your smartphone, your mobile device. That can be tempting to want to just monitor your class constantly. You get a really engaged student. You may want to be as available for them as possible. So always be sure you have healthy boundaries with technology and with your job in general. Requirements for student interaction should be clearly articulated. Netiquette is one concept I want to brush on today. You can see more detailed information about it in our previous student engagement webinars. It's essentially having a code of conduct spelled out, saying what is acceptable, what is not. If you're going to require interaction, you want to spell out exactly what you're looking for, what is the minimum that is required of students. You may want to include things such as grammar. That is up to you. In terms of grammar, I handle that differently in different classes. I do a little bit of grammar correcting when I'm teaching mathematics class. I'm not as nitpicky as I would be if I were teaching an English class. But I do suggest, regardless of your content, to some degree, you teach students how to speak grammatically and to speak professionally online. So not allowing abbreviations like LOL, JK, that kind of thing. We want to try to prepare these students for the workforce. We want to try to prepare these students for college, depending on what their goals may be after their HSE program. So let's talk a little bit more about Netiquette. So remember, it provides rules for student interactions. You want to be clear as possible. This is something that you want to have in writing. Let's see, be clear about what's inappropriate. So Albion provides a good instructions for developing a Netiquette policy. So let me open Albion here for just 1 second. So right here, this is the core rules of Netiquette. They have these 10 rules. If you click on the rules, it goes into more detail. So if you are developing a Netiquette policy, I suggest you check that out. This presentation will be posted on NMDELT's website, nmdelt.org. And at the end of this presentation, I have listed the link to this and all of the other resources that I am referring to today, so feel free to look at them. I've also included at the end of the presentation a link to a sample New Mexico DELT Netiquette policy. It's fairly lengthy, but the effort there is to be as detailed and clear as possible. So here again, this is from albion.com, and a link to this will be provided on the NMDELT webpage through this presentation that I am working with. So be clear about what types of statements are inappropriate. You don't want this to devolve into something that it shouldn't, and that sometimes happens online. Let's see, and here I'll just open our sample NMDELT policy. This is through Google Docs. You won't have the ability to edit this document, but you will have the ability to read it. And notice there's some color coding for the different sections. If you have any questions about the sample policy, any kind of questions related to developing an etiquette policy, you're more than welcome to email me or any member of the New Mexico DELT team. Terry Gustafson is also a very good resource on the NMDELT team for things like the etiquette policy. Let's see. So watching your words, you want to be really careful about how you phrase things online. You want to be careful how you phrase things anytime you're interacting with a student or colleague, but online you want to be particularly careful because there's a written record of it. It's something for your student to fixate on, and maybe they will try to read between the lines, read what's not there. Of course, there's no way for you to possibly be proactive in all this, but there are things you can do just to make your language the best it can be in terms of keeping your students engaged. You want to focus on a lot of open-ended questions. You don't want things where students can answer simply yes or no. You want to try to begin questions with I instead of you. It's never a good idea to begin a question with you. It's not really a good idea to begin questions with why either. Create questions to get students thinking about their goals and dreams. So as you're doing your discussion boards, you really want to try to get them focusing on the future, where they want to go, and then express your belief that they can achieve those things. You want to write questions in a way that they build a partnership between student and teacher and student and student. You want to try and create an atmosphere of, hey, we're all in this together. I've found it can be quite comforting for students to let them know, hey, you and I share a common goal. Our common goal is for you to be successful here in this program. And like I said earlier, avoid why questions. You really want to be trying to build a student's intrinsic motivation. So as you're encouraging the student, as you're telling the student you believe in them, as their peers are saying, I believe in you, that's providing extrinsic motivation, which is very, very helpful. It's coming from outside the student, but you also want to be trying to phrase things in a way that you're getting students thinking about, why do you want to succeed? Is it for you? Is it for your family? Is it for a sense of personal accomplishment? What is it? And really try to get them intrinsically motivated. So hopefully you're seeing them doing work outside of class. A great way to get students intrinsically motivated is motivational interviewing. It's a set of techniques. It's a collaborative, person-centered, evidence-based guiding method of communication for enhancing and strengthening intrinsic motivation for change. Our March 2016 webinar was an overview of motivation theory. If you want to know a little bit more about motivation theory, that's a great place to start. Motivational interviewing is a technique under the larger umbrella of motivation theory. Motivational interviewing is a wonderful technique. And so I want to go now for a few minutes over here to the motivational interviewing website. This is motivationalinterviewing.org. This is one really good resource if you want to learn more about motivational interviewing, if you want to get familiar with motivational interviewing. If you want to get certified in it, you can get certified here through this website. So here's a short introductory video about motivational interviewing. It's really just a way of increasing intrinsic motivation. It's initially a counseling theory. It started in the addictions field, but over the years, it's spread to all different fields. It's widely used in business, from what I understand. It's also used in education with a fair bit of success. So here's a brief introduction.
Motivational interviewing, I think, fundamentally is an approach to helping people who are ambivalent about any kind
Cash, is it possible for you to turn up the volume?
Yes.
their life, whether it's making a particular kind of change,
Much better, thank you.
their substance use or health behavior, but also other kinds of changes in their relationships, changes in how they deal with life in general. For me, motivational interviewing is about inspiring people to change and respecting people and looking up to them in such a way that they remember to look up to themselves and help enhance their strength and their confidence about making changes to their lives to make them as fulfilling as possible.
Well, the attraction for me as a practitioner working in addiction around motivational interviewing is that it sets a different relationship with the client from the start off. With so many of the other interventions that we might draw on, that we might use, they're often about giving information. They're often about taking people through a particular course of strategies, about helping them develop techniques about managing things that need to change and being able to maintain that change, all of which is good. But what motivational interviewing does, which I think, and it's such a great boon for the practitioner, is that it allows you to develop a relationship with a client whereby you're not the expert. You're not trying to say, I know what's wrong with you and here is the solution. It's a relationship whereby you come together and you're nothing something out as peers, as equals. As I've got something to put in this kitty, you've got something to put into the kitty, into our basket of shared knowledge. And that is what underpins motivational interviewing for me. And it's because you come together as equals in a joint exercise that things can begin to happen. And those things that begin to happen are that the client starts to look more inwards around what are the resources that I've got, what's the understanding I've got about what's going on, what are the skills that I can call on to be able to make some change. And the practitioner kind of almost becomes the secondary player here, who nudges this internal problem-solving exercise that goes on.
I think a lot's been made about ambivalence around people not being sure what it is they want to do. But what I've seen a lot is that people often are on the fence not because they don't really know which way they want to go, but because they're frightened and they don't have the confidence to make their lives what they want.
We've learned something about mechanisms of action in motivational interviewing. We know that the clinician's interpersonal skills are important in making MI effective. We know that change talk is likely to be implicated in the effectiveness of motivational interviewing. So those are both good things to know. If you're a clinician just starting out and you're just beginning to use or learn motivational interviewing, you have it way easier than people who first started, because we have some roadmaps for you about, like, these are the elements that are really important to pay attention to. So that's an advantage. But what a mistake it would be to think that we actually know why MI really works, or that we've got the mechanisms of action for it nailed down. We're just beginning to know a little bit. That's where we really are, is that we know a little tiny bit, and there's so much more to know.
And often sort of clients will come to me where they might feel right or wrong, but they certainly feel as though they're stuck. There's something kind of not quite working for them. And so the sort of empathic approach, the collaborative approach allows me, or hopefully allows me anyway, to be able to enter their world and to sort of understand it from kind of their perspectives. And if I'm able to do that, if they allow me to do that, of course, through the sort of therapeutic relationship, then maybe we can kind of move through together. So I find that whole aspect really helpful.
And I think there are two components really that are equally important for me when I think about how we do that, how MI actually helps people resolve ambivalence. One is that when people are ambivalent about any area of their life, they tend to build a sense of pressure about that decision, about making the decision. Often the pressure comes from outside. People are pushing on them, giving them a hard time, advising them, telling them they need to change this or that. But just as often, it comes from inside. We begin to become frustrated with ourselves. Why haven't I done this already? What's wrong with me?
What's it ever going to take? Am I ever going to get out of this indecision and this frustrated, uncertain state? And I think as that pressure builds, people become less and less able to work through and resolve the ambivalence. I think it actually contributes to people becoming more and more stuck in a kind of chronically ambivalent state. And I think one part of what MI does is really help to remove that pressure, to help people take the pressure off, so that they can begin to think about the decision they're trying to make, the change they're considering, in a way that isn't so affected by that pressure and the pressure that sort of interferes with their ability to think clearly and think in a fresh way about what they want to do. I think given the ability to take the pressure off, the other thing that MI does is really help people tap into their own well of ability to make good decisions for themselves, their own natural inherent motivation to move in a positive direction, for growth, for improved health and well-being. And once people can tap into that and feel supported in doing that, really invited to do that, they're very often able to come to a decision, solve the problem, realize what it is that they want and need to do, and move forward.
Right, so that is an overview of motivational interviewing. And here again, motivational interviewing is a way to go about enhancing intrinsic motivation, getting that motivation to come from within the student. And I apologize, it looks like Google Slides took me back to the beginning of my presentation. There we go, there's where we were. So again, that was motivationalinterviewing.org. If you're interested, that's an excellent resource for learning more about motivational interviewing to enhance that intrinsic motivation. So two basic types of discussions. There's student-to-teacher discussions, and you need to distinguish between these two types of discussions. The other type is student-to-student discussions. So the student-to-teacher discussions, I suggest keeping that private, keep that personal, just between you and the student. Those are things that would happen via email or a journal. Student-to-student interactions, it's important to let the students know those things will be more public, they'll be visible to the class. That's via discussion spaces, blogs, and social media. If students want to have private discussions between themselves, they would need to email one another. And always remember, it means more coming from another student than from the teacher. So that motivational interviewing video talks about being certain you're not always the expert. I mean, you are the expert in your field, you're the expert in a lot of things, but be careful that you don't jump in and try to control the discussions. Be careful you don't jump in and try to dominate the discussions. It can be tempting at times. Sometimes it's best if students are having a vigorous discussion to just let them talk amongst themselves. Hearing encouragement, maybe hearing ideas is going to have more impact coming from a peer than from the teacher. Although I don't want to diminish your impact as the teacher. The teachers also have a major impact in the class. You have a lot of different prompts. You can have discussions around articles that you find online, videos, as I did with this motivational interviewing videos. There's a lot of motivational videos on YouTube. It seems I'm having difficulty speaking this morning. My apologies. Puzzles can be really nice. I'll have a couple of examples of these later. You can share podcasts, discuss around those. You can have discussions about blogs. And this is one I really enjoy, is individual student research. One of my favorite discussion postings is where I have students go out and research the precision in mathematics. Their creativity always impresses me, and it's a great way to get them seeing math in the real world. This, I think, could also apply with other subjects. So some resources for prompts. Brown.edu has a site called Key Questions. Gives you some ideas. There's a site called Designing for Learning. Through Edutopia, there is TeacherStream, and there is Connect with the Edutopia community. It's a sort of blog, a sort of discussion space Here again, the links for all these will be posted at nmdelt.org when I post this presentation immediately after today's webinar. Cornell University has some tips for structuring discussion questions. So in some ways, very much the same as Quality Matters, others go a little bit deeper. So always tie into learning outcomes. Always do tie into learning outcomes with all your discussions and activities in the course. You want to incorporate Bloom's taxonomy. You don't simply want to do simple questions. You also want to have deeper questions that provoke more thought, provoke more critical thinking kinds of skills to prepare for the HSE exams. You want to create and stagger mini deadlines. So maybe your initial posting is due today. You're required to respond to your classmates 48 hours after. Communicate the expectations, be as clear as possible in that. Use a rubric if you're going to assign any kind of grade. You want the students to understand what is expected of them. And then sometimes it can be nice to break students into groups, especially if you're finding that they're not initiating discussions on their own. You might assign sort of discussion buddies. If you do assign groups, assign roles within the groups is considered best practice. Have a recorder, a reporter. Those are just some ideas for that. If you go to Cornell's website, they give you some ideas for different ways to assign roles. You want to be sure you're managing discussions. Again, allow the students to talk. You don't want to dominate. Ask probing questions to keep the conversation going. Try to get the students thinking a little deeper. Try to say things in a way that will continue them to discuss rather than you coming in as the expert and the final word. You really do want to keep an eye on these things. I would check the discussion boards at least once a day. If there are any incivilities, address them immediately and let the students know they're in violation of the Netiquette policy. Watch out for orphaned comments and silent students. Watch out for the students that disappear into the background. I hypothesize these are the same students who would try to disappear into the background in your normal classroom. Orphan comments refer to comments that no one is responding to. You want to offer synthesis and summary when you think there needs to be closure. Let's see, so some sample prompts. Set a goal for when you'd like to complete your HSE and identify at least 3 things that will help you achieve these goals. This is one of my favorites. Plato requires a high degree of precision. Brainstorm with your group and identify at least 3 things in the real world that require a very high degree of precision. Talking about stressors for HSE students. Talking about study skills. This one can be very interesting as they teach one another study skills. It gets interesting when students call each other out on their study skills in these discussion boards. Again, you want to monitor closely. Get students thinking about their career, have them research about their career. BLS.gov is a wealth of information. Here's a couple of examples of puzzles I use for critical thinking. I typically will post these and then wait a few days before providing the correct answer. A lot of times students will get to debating these kind of things. In my opinion, it's teaching them good critical thinking skills. Lots of videos out there to start discussions. Here's just a few resources. Maybe have students watch a video and share their thoughts on them. Here are my resources. Again, this will be posted to nmdelt.org. If you do have questions or comments, I ask that you email me as I have run right up to the minute on this presentation. And I hope to see you next week at NMEA in Dallas and also in our next student engagement webinar that will be in May. Thank you for attending. Have a wonderful rest of your day.